Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to a post on men and women. And I think that the way I had originally organized this post, it would have made men not, they would have rejected it just reflexively. And I think that the reason that would happen is that young men especially feel like the narrative they've been fed since they were young is really unfair to them. This idea that within academia they'll be told that they're not good, that historically they're the oppressors, they hurt women and they're bad. And these young men say, I haven't done anything bad, I haven't hurt anyone, I haven't oppressed anyone, I'm just working really hard to try to make it like everybody else. And so I can understand why that group of people would react really badly to anybody who is drawing attention to areas of our society where women really still are at a major disadvantage. And it's important to I think that what you see is that there are some areas where men are at a major disadvantage, and areas where women are at a major disadvantage. These out of balance areas are something that I think we should aspire to try to bring into better balance. And a lot of this is not the fault of women or men, it's the fault of our economy right now, where you have older men with lots of money paying for sex with young women who should be with young men, but those young men are not getting launched in this economy because the old men are holding on to power. And that's causing strain in the system and often strain between the genders. People misdirect their rage. And in physics, it's like one of the last bastions of male power hierarchies. And so I can understand why certain young men may look at this and say, don't take this away from us too. This is our last space. This is the space where we can compete according to our rules, and no woman can show up and say, no, you have to play according to our rules, because that seems to be what they feel like has happened elsewhere. So I understand that, but I also want to use my position as an outsider to offer an outside perspective on a system that I think hurts men more than it helps them. So a young man might look at physics and think, yes, this is a space where I can work hard, I can fight, I can prove myself, I can climb up a hierarchy, and I can live, I can feel alive. But I just want them to know that those sorts of hierarchies have a lot of casualties. They hurt a lot of people. There are men who within these hierarchies that literally work themselves to death. And it makes me really sad to see it when that happens. Or it's even really sad to see the men who've made it to the top of the hierarchy, only to just watch their bodies fall apart because they have given so much to it. It sucks the life out of them. And I wish for these men to have experienced a more balanced life too. Just watching the abuses of this system made me want to just disengage from it and not contribute to it. So I would hope that this little anecdote I'm going to share can be viewed within the small world of physics, which is still out of balance. And it's not necessarily supposed to be reflective of the world as a whole or of the other areas where men are disadvantaged. So I think we have to focus on individual problems and solve them on the micro scale rather than seeing a problem and blowing it up out of proportion on the macro scale, where it may not be, you have to find the right cure for the poison. And if you try to cure things on the wrong layer of the system, you're gonna mess things up. So I've gone on too long. I want to get to the content of this post on gender and physics. So a month ago, I wrote up a post on the history of gravity and quantum phenomena. I noted that if I were to try to tell the same story without mentioning any men, I'd write about Hypatia of Alexandria, Émile du Châtelet, Sophie Germain, Marie Curie, Lisa Meitner, Mileva Merrick, and Emmy Noether. I had planned to do that here, but instead, I'd rather invite you to consider an anecdote from a man who was reflecting on the least impressive PhD candidates he had seen during his doctoral work in physics, or it was mathematics. Yeah. So, strictly in terms of their application, I imagine one of the least impressive PhD applicants I've seen was a guy named Brant Kronholm. Don't get me wrong, I'm not writing and using this guy's name, no less, to knock him. Brant, if you see this, drop me a line. It's just that he applied to the PhD program in math at my school, and he came with an extremely light math background. In fact, his first degree was in literature. Somewhere along the way to getting his master's in literature, he got interested in mathematics. He definitely took some math coursework, but I don't even remember if he got an undergraduate math degree prior to applying to the PhD program. He made it through. I think he joined the program in 2001 and graduated in 2010 or so. But that long delay involved extenuating circumstances. I think his advisor left at a very inconvenient point for him. Perhaps as a condition to admission, I recall he took some undergraduate math courses during his first year of graduate school. But don't get me wrong, he's a smart and hardworking guy. His intelligence and work ethic were not unimpressive. It's just that he came from a very non-standard background, which was certainly not unimpressive in any traditional sense. Now, if we're talking about the least impressive PhD applicant from a personal sense, and not necessarily based on their credentials, then I won't go so far as to out her by name, but she had some very strange ideas about math that just screamed unimpressive. I formed my first opinion of her in an analytic number theory class we were both taking. One of the problem sets involved proving a bunch of stuff with the gamma function. If you don't know the gamma function, it occupies this kind of funny place in mathematics. It's by no means obscure, but at the same time it's not so important as to warrant its own course. At most, it might get a dedicated moment or two in some course or another, but that's about it. And that's all we need. For our problem set, the professor gave us a definition of the gamma function that made our problems pretty straightforward. Nonetheless, this girl flipped out. The gamma function? The gamma function. This was not in the list of prerequisites for the class. I have not had a class on the gamma function, and I think it's ridiculous that I should be expected to solve homework problems involving it. This is sort of the mathematical equivalent of being livid that you have to cut your own steak at a restaurant. I want to characterize this part of her personality as immature, but it's a certain kind of immaturity. It's mathematical immaturity. It reflects the idea that one is helpless to learn anything on their own, and that one's whole mathematical development should occur only on a carefully planned script, dished out in bite-sized pieces. But she muddled through too. So, reading this bothered me. And after I read it, I felt I needed to reply. And I wrote to this guy, the fact that you felt so judgmental about the young woman in your class, but you felt so impressed by the young man in your class, it nicely illustrates how difficult it is for some women to be accepted by groups of men. In a group of women, complaining about silly things is how we bond. We don't use a complaint as an opportunity to pass judgment on one another. Women show weakness to one another in order to be friendly and establish commiseration. But when a woman does this in a group of men, she is often judged as weak. It is difficult to be surrounded by a group of people who have been socialized in a completely different way from you. And he replied, to clarify, this wasn't a mere complaint. This wasn't, sheesh, these problem sets are hard, or, ugh, I hate the gamma function. This was level 10 righteous indignation. This was, he, the professor, owes us all an apology. I will complain to the department chair all the way up to the university president if need be. He'll be lucky to keep his job. Let's take gender out of it. I see you have a physics background and spent time in academia. How would you respond to a first-year graduate student of unspecified gender who strenuously complains to you that a homework problem is inappropriate because it involves concept that was not listed as a prerequisite to your course, when it is, in fact, an adequate description of that concept, appears in the problem itself? For concreteness, let's say it's a mechanics course, and one of the problems involves computing the trajectory of a particle given its jerk and some initial conditions. Jerk is defined in the problem as the time derivative of acceleration. And so that's what he wrote. And I just felt like he totally missed my point, so that's what I wrote. I think you missed or illustrated my point about men and women being socialized in different ways and not interpreting their social cues according to each other's rules. And he replied, would you care to restate your point? And I did. I wrote, it is hard for some people to be accepted by groups of men who don't pick up on certain types of social cues. And he replied, okay, but besides whatever other social cues may or may not have been given or picked up on, are you saying calling for the job of a tenured professor because he gave a hard homework problem is a proportionate or appropriate reaction? Does your answer change if you don't regard the homework problem as hard and in fact regard it to be easy for someone at that level of education? With all due respect, it seems like you are going out of your way to find facts that aren't there during an event that you were not present for. Sure, maybe I didn't understand her sense of humor, but I assure you, it was clear that she was not joking and was not kidding. It was clear at the time that she made those statements, and that conclusion was only bolstered by the way she comported herself during the 2 subsequent years I spent in her company. With all stories like this, it helps to have been there. And as someone who was there, reactions like yours frustrate me. You lament how hard it is for women to operate in a group of men. I lament how easily and with such apparently firm conviction you identify errors in my story. As if I can't tell the difference between an innocuous complaint made to bond and someone who flipped out and was livid with righteous indignation. I'll admit to missing a social cue here and there, but do you really think that I'm so oblivious as to mistake a casual joke with a flip out? Without knowing hardly anything about me or her, is it somehow so much more likely in your judgment that I misread the situation rather than this person actually being inappropriately perturbed as to warrant your lament? I don't think it is. I think your reaction is suggestive of something else. That's what he wrote. So I replied, when you go out of your way to provide a personal anecdote comparing an unqualified yet capable young man to a qualified yet incapable young woman who flipped out, I take issue with what you are trying to achieve. On more than one occasion, I have seen men in STEM make fun of women colleagues over flipping out, and you seemed to be exemplifying this trend. Adding insult to injury when someone is struggling is called bullying, and when you are in the majority, you should be especially aware when you are doing it. So, and of course, he responded again. I'm not sure I went out of my way. I think my two stories are responsive to the question, and they aren't so much foils for each other as they are individually responsive to different interpretations of the question. The question asks about a least impressive PhD candidate. That could mean either least impressive on paper or least impressive in execution. I simply answered both, as I often do with questions that require interpretation. I get that you have seen men in STEM make fun of women colleagues for flipping out. You don't say it, but I assume that you didn't always agree with the flip out characterization. In the situations you witnessed firsthand, I further assume your disagreement is based on first-hand information you witnessed. But here you lack that first-hand information, so instead you appear to condemn me, based on the behavior of other men in STEM. In fact, you do even worse. You seem to minimize the first-hand account I provided. I didn't say it in my main answer, but the speech I wrote for her is pretty close to a verbatim quote. It is abbreviated, however. Her rant went on from the end of class all the way back to our shared office in a different building, and then some, certainly in excess of 5 minutes. On the assumption my quotes were accurate and her statements were sincere and not jokes, how would you characterize what she said? Was it an appropriate response? I think that your first-hand anecdote, and I responded to this that I think your first-hand anecdotes are nothing more than sexist stereotypes hiding behind the guise of an innocent anecdote. He replied, if you come to that conclusion knowing essentially nothing about me and nothing about the person in the story, I think you are operating with an entirely different set of stereotypes. Last words yours if you want it. But I couldn't resist, of course, so I wrote, was that the I know you are, but what am I defense? So, I'm sorry if this irritated you. I am giving you this anecdote because I think it explains a conflict that often happens when women are trying to work in environments where they are where they're basically the only woman in the room, where it's really easy to be misinterpreted, and where the men in the room often have a really hard time understanding the perspective of someone who isn't just like them. And this became really clear to me because this little exchange happened on an online forum, and in response to it, a whole chorus of other men piped in to take this guy's side. And I mean, it was unanimous. So when you're in the minority, you get no support. And I really wish that men would be more sensitive to this when they encounter women in their workplaces or in their classrooms. And likewise, men, I'm sure, struggle with this too when they end up being the only man in the room. You know, there are definitely disciplines, especially in academia, where that can be the case. And those men often have to learn how to operate according to women's rules of hierarchy, which are quite different from men's. And as we bring things in greater balance across the spectrum, I think we're all going to have to just learn a little bit more about each other's rules and, yeah, be sensitive to that so that we don't hurt each other. And that's really what it's about. Men and women should not be hurting each other. Men shouldn't feel hurt by a historical narrative that makes them into the bad guy. And women shouldn't be hurt by historical narratives that make them into, you know, weak, manipulative people who flip out. And that is all I wanted to say about that. I did try to write about these issues through fiction, and I find that through fiction you can say things that are a lot harder to say directly through a medium like this, and that's why I hope more people take a look at my book, and yeah, and it's also entertaining. So, thank you for watching. Until next time.